Good afternoon, Alistair, and welcome to Andrea's Dance World. And I just want to welcome you and thank you for agreeing to be a part of me tracing the history of salsa. And obviously, you are a valuable part, so thank you.
You're most welcome. It's lovely to be asked, but it's also something that hasn't really been explored that much. And so I think the work you're doing is, I think it's essential. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be a part of it.
Well, you definitely deserve to be a part of it. I remember you very, very well. So let's get into this. And with everyone, I start with the basics of, where you were born, things like this, and your nationality. And your ethnicity. And for me, this is really important, as I say to everyone, because I think race, religion, all of these things are just so important and a beautiful thing. And I think it's always interesting to know where people have their origins are, when they came into salsa. So the same with you, that I asked everyone, tell us, what your, where you were born, what your nationality is and everything and your origins. That'd be great to know.
Sure. Well, I'm English through and through. My grandfather's family, or the father's side of the family, is from a fairly poor farming community up in Shropshire, which is on the borders of Wales, and a sort of Methodist pastoral community. My grandfather moved to London, became a metropolitan policeman, and was a policeman throughout the Second World War. My mother's side, my grandfather was a chef, and my grandmother had been a housemaid before she started a family. And so people often assume that I'm reasonably well spoken, but if you were servant working class, then you had to speak well to get a job in the big house.
Wow, I didn't know that.
No, that's there was also that aspirational thing in the 50s and 60s where people valued speaking better and improving their vocabulary. Yeah. My parents were of that generation, so that's also that part of it. So I don't really have a regional accent. No, I was born just outside Southampton on the south coast. That's where my parents were living at the time, and they were both typical sort of South Londoners from South Wimbledon, and they had left London like so many families did in the 60s. And so we went to Southampton, where I was born, and then back up to Shropshire for a few years. But most of my teenage years were growing up in rural Kent, sort of a house in between the hamlets, in between the villages, in between the towns. Wow. Technically the 13th century. And I'm sure a lot of people who grow up in the country have the same thing. You either get comfortable with it and stay, or you make plans to get out of town as soon as you can. And as soon as I finished the A levels, boom, London. Wow. It was quite an experience. Good and bad.
London.
Bright lights, spoke the language. Oh, that's absolute rubbish. I'd been interrailing around Europe. I'd fallen head over heels with a Swedish girl who became an au pair in North London. And I just followed my libido.
Not your heart, your libido.
Yeah, you might as well be honest about it. Yeah, absolutely. My heart, which of course was duly broken, but it got me to London, and that was okay. And I remember working 3 jobs. I was feeding calves on a farm, getting them ready to be put into veal crates and shipped to France. And at the time, it was one of the farms that was involved in the mad cow disease. And we lived in one of the epicenters of it. And my sort of rival at secondary school, sadly, was one of the first victims of CJD that came from it. So it's, I mean, it's as rural can be. My sister-in-law's family have been farming that area so long that they're in the Doomsday Book. So it's that kind of thing, but with a lot of people who moved out of London, and I've got a lot of people who were just in regular jobs kind of thing. So it's a mixed community. And so I got to London, but my early years, the influences, I was thinking about this the other day. What are my Latin influences? And they are few and far between, but they are quite significant. So when I was at school, there was a re-release of the song Richie Ray, La Bamba.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to chalk that up as the first Latin track.
And you liked it, did you?
Yeah, it was. The social life back then, and it just sounds like dinosaurs were flying around, which they probably were, was you progressed from school discos, which were playing pop, to village discos, which are usually run by a rugby club or a football club, and they come at the local hall, and they got exactly the same DJs in to do the mobile discos. So the best one around was called Rent a Boogie, and they would come along in a little van and set up on the stage with both their lights, and they would play the hits of the day. And it was very polarized, which I think is a theme that has run through the salsa community. You were either a kind of rocker who would stomp around to status quo and bully the DJ into putting some Motorhead on or something like that, or you were into the soul kind of things. And people of my generation will remember Top of the Pops, and you always used to have, a soul band and a rock band and a solo artist, and most importantly, Pan's People, stroke Legs and Co, stroke Hot Gossip.
I remember that very well.
Yeah, and one of the dances that I remember dancing was called the Quo, and it was kind of like a line-up dance, fairly stompy, a macho. And Arlene Phillips, the Pan's People lady and Strictly Joe, she created that dance, and so we'd copied it off, or someone had copied it off Top of the Pops, and it was a big thing around the country. There was that. There was the rowing boat song, which will was
that Yarborough Peoples?
No idea. No idea. So. It was just the oops upside your head and all that stuff. Yeah. And sitting on the floor and crazy stuff. But a dance scene, I'm not sure if that counts. The thing that I think is a major influence on me was at the end of the evening, they would put two slow smoochy numbers on. And one of them always seemed to be one of the many releases of Nights in White Satin. And it was a proper, smoochy, dad's disco, English two-step, as I call it.
Yeah.
And you'd spend the whole evening waiting to ask someone to dance. And it was a bad evening. And I didn't have many good evenings, put it that way. So when I got into salsa, one of the big things for me was, once I could dance, was to be able to go up to someone and have a better than even chances of someone saying, yeah, let's dance, was incredibly powerful for me. That was kind of healing those many school disco experiences.
Wow. Okay. So tell us the story. No, actually, I don't want to go there yet. I want to. What were your preferred music choices then before salsa? What were you actually listening to?
So, as a great listener of Desert Island Discs, I would have to say, in terms of youth music, it was the Boomtown Rats and some of the, if you like, the softer punk. I mean, I've come to appreciate things like The Clash later on, but Boomtown Rats had a more sophisticated sound. Police, that was my sort of era. I was less into that sort of disco wham kind of thing. I was also quite influenced with my brother's music, and he was 3.5 years older. So really the association starts with bands like Mud doing Tiger Feet and Susie Quattro and The Sweet, and your listeners are all tuning off and they've never heard of any of these bands because they're all too young. But yeah, it was good stuff. I was never quite a rocker, and I was never quite soul boy or mod or anything like that. I was always sort of somewhat independent of it. My thing was 1950s rock and roll. I loved the music when I was at school. My mum and dad.
Well, I grew up on that as well, to be honest. So, I always say my music taste is very, very varied. And, we listened to Bill Haley and the Comet. We had, the album that would be, was it the ones that kind of had four LPs in it, the greatest hits. We had loads of stuff like that. So, so my music taste is very varied. I don't think that's unusual.
No, but it was it was in the country. Our access to music was you either listened to it via the radio, and quite a few people recorded it onto cassette tapes and made up mixtapes and stuff like that. In terms of vinyl, you had the local Woolworths, and that's it. That was it. So
okay, wow.
That's
I understand.
Best of rock and roll four album thing. I can see it there as $4.99 in Woolworths, and being too expensive at the time.
Wow. Okay.
My mum and dad had been part of a youth club back in the 50s in Wimbledon, and they didn't own a record player, but they would buy records and take them to the youth club. So a big influence on me was they had an album by Buddy Holly. And I think that's significant because quite a few of the tracks have that what they called Bo Diddley rhythm, what you and I would call the son clave. So there was that other connection. He incidentally died on the aeroplane with Richie Ray as well, so there's another little loop going on there. They also had a really scratched up version of the Twist and Shout EP by the Beatles. And when I hear people play that song on the radio now, it doesn't sound right because it doesn't have the scratches in the right place. It's got to have
that.
And that was interesting. I found out later that the Beatles had originally sorry, are you okay with sort of weird facts and random stuff coming in? It's my way of overcoming nerves.
Of course.
There's a lovely sort of circular loop in sort of history that the Beatles auditioned to, I think, Decca, which they failed, but one of the tracks they used was Besame Mucho, which had been
really?
Yeah, it's on YouTube, a really fast vamped up version of Besame Mucho.
I'm gonna find that.
You got it. Yeah, it's kind of weird. And that was written by a Mexican lady, and I can't remember her name, but it's the most re-recorded Latin song that's ever been written. The Beatles then, of course, go on to write Yesterday, which is the most re-recorded English language song. So a lovely loop going on through there. I think another important influence for me is my mum's love of sort of 1950s musicals. So it's the King and I, and all of those sort of classic ones, especially the tracks that I remember, West Side Story.
Yeah, do you remember?
Yeah, and it was just that buzz. And for West Side Story, it wasn't just the music and the rhythm that was speaking to me, but it was also the energy on in the dancing on the film. Apparently, at the age of 10, I wanted to be Fred Astaire.
Okay, so dance was there somewhere. That's amazing.
It was so hidden. If anyone had turned around and said, "You're going to end up teaching salsa for 25 years," I would just laugh at them. It would be ridiculous. Concept. That's not how my life was. I never had a plan, but that wasn't part of it. And in fairness to Fred Astaire, I love the smoothness of it, but I remember seeing the clip of the Williams brothers dancing, and that just blew me away. I wish
very athletic.
Oh, just sensational, Yeah. I'd have loved to hear an interview of them and how they made it in a world that was just set up for them not to make it.
Yeah, well, you know what? I was going to say, so you were a Fred Astaire lover. I was a Gene Kelly lover. I totally adored his dancing, and I only discovered the Nicholas brothers because of Gene Kelly, obviously, because you know he
Definite
used them in
connection, yeah.
films. So yeah, I mean, absolutely amazing, amazing what they did, and Gene Kelly was amazing too. But let's move. Sorry, I'm gonna let you finish. Sorry.
I like the way Gene Kelly brought sizzle and pizzazz to it. Fred Astaire was that smoothness, and he always made his partner look amazing,
That's true.
which is a very strong quality. But Gene Kelly, you know, and whoever he was dancing with, he put himself center of the picture there.
Never thought about that before. That's interesting. Okay. I'm going to take another look at that. But yeah, but let's move forward. So tell me the story, everyone who's watching, how you discovered salsa. And obviously, I love doing the timeline. I think that's really important. What was the year and how did you discover salsa?
I'm pretty sure it was it's a long time ago, and there's no documentary evidence. It was August 1992. So that makes me 25, 26, something like that. I'm 55 and not very good at maths, so you'll have to do the working out. And living in London, working as a photographer, and my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, said, you know, let's go down to the Notting Hill Carnival. We went down to the Notting Hill Carnival, and on some back street was this strange alien music coming out. I had honestly never heard anything like it. Someone must have told me it was salsa, but I had never heard that word before. My wife she'd had a Mexican landlady and actually been taken to a Salsa Cruise concert, but I didn't know that. So she had an awareness, I didn't, and I saw people dancing, and I think for me it was quite important they were dancing on the street. It wasn't a stage, it wasn't a performance, it was just people enjoying that music and having that energy, and it's the Notting Hill Carnival, and wow. And I remember reaching down and picking up a flyer off the floor, and it was a flyer for a Saturday night at Salsa Fusion.
Cool.
And we said, fine, we'll go along. There was a free class at the beginning, which was great, and we thought we'll do the free class and be able to dance all night like those people we saw in Notting Hill. So he duly went along. This is in Notre Dame Hall in Leicester Square back when it was there.
I remember that place.
Yeah. Not the best air conditioning in the world, but
no.
Good floor. And we watched the dance class and realized we couldn't dance and sat down and watched the evening. And then we carried on and we just kept going. And by the time we started, it was obviously Stephanie Lipton and Julio Martinez. So I think Julio just joined Stephanie after Ramiro. And we just worked our way through the ranks. I think significantly, and if any of my students are listening, cover your ears. When I moved from beginners to improvers level, I was so nervous, I refused point blank to dance with anyone else other than my girlfriend. Something I have never let my students do.
Oh wow!
So, yeah, they were good times, and I didn't fully appreciate it at the time how much innovation Stephanie Lipton brought to salsa. She was bringing in ideas from Ciroc and modern jive that had the head start in us. I don't think it was about 83 they got going. Things like the regular moving of partners, getting the whole system a bit more organized than it was. It was we had the impression And it may be an unfair impression that it was slightly more chaotic elsewhere. So we opted for that, and therefore we didn't experience it elsewhere. So I'm talking rubbish, but we liked it, and we got through, and eventually we joined the Salsa Fusion demonstration team, and we did all sorts of interesting gigs. I remember when TV, I think it was TVA, yeah, started. They did
TVA, wow.
I think it was TVA. They did an open air broadcast, and they wanted some salsa dancers to do the very opening credits of the show. So we all, for some bizarre reason, met up at Chessington Zoo, as it was then, not Chessington Worlds of Adventures, and danced. And by the time we got there, they dumbed down the idea that we were just doing a forward and back step, holding up a little placard going "Hola" or something like that. And it was just complete ridiculous. But technically, that was the first television experience. So in 1994, we got to the point where Felicity, DJ Felicidad, my wife, and I were doing demos at parties and anywhere we could. And we did a couple at an art centre, and we did a gig at the Old Bull Art Centre up in High Barnet, right on the edges of London. And it went okay-ish. And they were due to have a couple, a Colombian couple, and I never got to know their names, start a 10-week course, which had sold out the following week. And for some reason, which I never know, they weren't able to make it. So because we'd done a demonstration for the venue, but a different department, a different event within the venue the week before, they picked up the phone, called us and said, would you like to take over this 10-week course? Which... Okay.
Let me ask you this, Alistair. Sorry to interrupt you, because I don't want to lose the questions, and I really love asking this question. I know how I remember so much how I started, and I think what I always talk about is what made me go back, and I want to ask you, what made you and your girlfriend decide to go back? What was it?
Go back to teaching?
No, go back to the next lesson, because, what was it that attracted you to continue? Sorry, I'm not being clear.
No, I think that's an excellent question. And my life at the time, I'd stopped being a photographer because I sort of run its course. I got to the top and it was great. And Fliss and I went traveling, we came back, needed a job, any old job, and I got a job in a garden centre. And I ended up working there and managing it for 9 years. And it was wonderful, but it didn't have any street credibility. It was kind of like, I remember going to parties in my 20s going, what do you do for a living? Oh, I work in a garden centre. Oh, that's nice, kind of thing. It got to the point where the garden centre was being sold and we didn't know who to, and I wasn't told anything at all. And it was an extremely stressful time. And that coincided completely with the time I was transitioning from sort of either beginners to improvers or something like that kind of things. And I'm certain there is a direct relationship between the stress I was experiencing and the catharsis of going out dancing, of being the movement. In fact, later there, back in the end of the 90s, I saw an article in a newspaper, and it said stress was the big killer back then. And they said the three things that combat stress are mild aerobic activity, humor, joy, entertainment, and social interaction. And I think they're just as true today. And salsa was giving me that at a time when I needed it desperately. So that there was a cathartic process going on there. And I honestly can't say whether I would have stayed in salsa if that transfer of ownership hadn't taken place.
Gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. And I always think, you know, and I've asked this to the US Latinos as well, the same question. At the beginning, were you enticed by the music by then as well? So obviously, you know, you were being drawn in, but how did you feel about the music?
Yes, is a clear answer to that. But you might detect just a little bit of a question mark, because I was enticed by the music, but I didn't feel it was my music. I was aware of my non-connection to anything Latino or anything urban. And I considered at the time salsa to be very much a sound from the barrios of New York. And so I felt an otherness, I felt an outsider, I felt separate from it. And that both, gave me an objective view of it, perhaps, but it also pulled me towards it because there was that sort of need to belong. As I can be straight with you, my first nickname on the salsa scene when I got to the point where I was regularly going out clubbing was the white guy who could dance. I certainly wasn't the only white guy who could dance, but most of the teachers and the role models were either Afro-Caribbean or Latino origin, and so it was unusual. I remember going to a Colombian expatriate club, because it was kind of one of those where you sat around in tables with 15 people with a bottle of aguardiente and a bottle of Coke kind of thing. And just literally being head and shoulders. I'm only 5'10", but being head and shoulders above the crowd and feeling so uncomfortable. But it gave me a lot. I learned to take small steps. I learned that I didn't want to bump into the guy next to me. I learned that consideration. I learned that a dance was a gift that someone gives me and I give to them. It's not something to be demanded or expected.
Can I ask you actually, before I allow you to continue speaking, sorry, because as I said, I really want people to understand who was around then, and so I can see that because I never knew who you learned from, so it's interesting to learn that you learned with Stephanie from Salsa Fusion. I'm hoping to contact Julia soon, actually. I would love to know what clubs were around then, and what other teachers do you remember who were teaching at that time?
Oh, well, it was, I consider myself the start of the sort of second generation. The first generation, as I understand it, in order, was Nelson, Giamara, Elder, Romero, and then Stephanie of Salsa Fusion. I put those as the core. And by April '95, when I started teaching, it was the first wave of their students to break out of central London and into the suburbs. So when I started, really
fascinates me, by the way. I'm really can't wait to get into this because it really fascinates me.
And I think that's a really good model to see it as a central London club that bumps along, slowly building up, and then suddenly it hits a tipping point and boom, it's out in the suburbs. So when we started teaching, it happened to be at High Barnet because of that circumstance, but I very quickly looked for a second venue. And we lived in Muswell Hill, so we thought, okay, let's see this one around there. But Isabel had started something in Crouch End, downstairs at the King's Head, which eventually we took over in a very nice way. But there was absolutely no question in my mind, why would I go and teach in Crouch End when there's already a salsa teacher there? London was big enough and there was no competition. By 1998, every little part of suburban London had 2 or 3 salsa nights going.
Wow.
There were 4 in High Barnet, and that's got fields on one side of it. There were 3 or 4 within spitting distance of Harrow, where we did the second venue.
Okay, what venue did you do in Harrow?
Oh, we did loads of them. We started at a hall called the Weldon Centre. We've got a sort of arch roof, and then we moved to the Herger Squash Club, and then we moved to the Cine Bar, and that was great. We used to put bands on and everything. That was the best one. And then to Time nightclub, which was above the High Street, where Susana Montero did the interdance classes.
Wow.
So it was, yeah, it was good. But there was Salsa Secrets up the road. There was Fred and Becky, and they were both in Rayners Lane at the same time. There was Fire in Wembley. There was Robert Jean in Wembley, of course, and Fire in Watford. And I mean, they're just the ones I know of. Someone once counted 80 salsa venues with inside the M25.
Wow.
And not a single YouTube clip.
I like that. I like that. So sorry. Anyway, sorry. I just wanted to get those details down. So
yeah, I think that's a useful detail. Yeah.
Please continue with your story. Sorry.
Where were we up to?
So because the couple. This is where I interrupted you. The couple didn't turn up for their 10-week course. You started to teach. Yeah. And
And you know, it was a very glamorous porter cabin at the back of the art studio. It was wonderful. I had acquired bad habits, and this is no reflection on Stephanie and Julio. God knows they did their best with me. But I've got size 12 feet, and I took footwork. I thought I'd learned to take small footwork, and I remember that first group. And after about week 3 or 4, I realized that they had even bigger footwork than I had, because they thought, okay, you take a big step to the side, you take a big step back, because that's what the teacher's doing. And I realized that I had to up my game in terms of what I was doing, so that it was modeling it carefully for them. I think it's also lovely to note that, I don't know if you know them, but Cheryl and Gordon, and sadly Cheryl died fairly recently, the last few years, and she was in my first ever cohort at High Barnet, and and they together were just wonderful dancers, and a big influence on the style as well.
Okay, no, I don't. Maybe I know their faces, but maybe I don't know them by name. Sorry.
I used to know everyone on the salsa scene, and you know, you could tell by the way someone danced who taught them almost. It was that, and that sadly has slipped away with, you know, a generation, if not 2 generations of new dancers, and that's how it should be. But I told you about the Salsa Fusion demonstration team. I think we're still in touch 25 years later. I mean, fairly regular touch with about 5 or 6 members of that group, half of it. So, and people often think that salsa is kind of like a single scene, and, you know, come and go kind of thing. And these are lasting friendships. Yeah, that I value very, very dearly. And that's, I think, sort of something to recognize, that salsa has always had that mixture of flirtatious energy and camaraderie.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's in one part very adult, and in the other part very childlike as well.
Yeah, it is. It
might be worth to mention at that time about how the scene was back then. Things had,
and I was going to come to that actually, but definitely. Yeah, no. Please say.
So you might get emails in correcting me on this, but Monday night, Ramiro at Bar Salsa. Tuesday night, can't remember. Wednesday, La Finca, had to be La Finca.
Tuesdays was Bar Rumba.
Tuesday was Bar Rumba, of course. Yes,
yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Wednesday.
Wednesday La Finca.
Yes, all right.
And of course, La Finca, the multi-level floor, and that wonderful hierarchy thing where, you know, were you good enough to go up an extra 18 inches and dance in the next bit? And the people who put their best hair on, their best clothes on, and went up and danced on that dance floor next to the intake fan, because the intake fan was right next to the outtake fan from the kitchen. And if they were cooking fish, then we were dancing the fish dance. And if we were dancing the burger dance, fantastic times. So that was Wednesdays. Thursdays, what was Thursdays?
Yeah, I think Thursday is the only one that I don't really know about Thursdays, I've got to be honest.
There was always a second night at La Finca that was never quite as busy, and I think often it was a Thursday. But it doesn't ring any bells. There was Loughborough Hotel. That was a big one, and they used to have the most scariest doorman on the planet. They were they were so tall and ebony and dark, and you park your car and hopefully it would still be there when you got back, and you go around the corners of the Loughborough to dance on a floor made of 8x4 chipboard.
Remember,
and walls so sticky, if you leant against them, you had that kind of morning after the carpeted experience where you kind of thing.
I remember.
Boy, the music was good. Saturdays, of course, was Salsa Fusion every other week. And a personal favorite of mine was the Palladium. Palladium, which was the small little bar underneath the Equinox.
Yeah, that was his name Jorge, the guy that ran that? Yeah,
I think it was, but it's DJ Ara, I think was.
Yes.
That was him, and it's tiny. I remember the first night when Homero Gonzalez turned up. Wow. And Homero had been a choreographer at the Tropicana show in Havana, and he got himself over. He spoke no English. His classes were 1, 2, 3, baby. That was it.
Really?
That was the whole thing. But even before his first class, for some reason I sort of just kept bumping into him. He came down the steps at Salsa Palladium, and there was a little sort of landing area, all carpeted, of course, and he started dancing. And I often tell my students about it. He did 3 moves, and the whole room turned to watch him. It was just magical. He just, it was kind of like, yeah, that's what I want to do. Wow. That's what I want. But not through complexity of moves, through presence. On the dance floor, which of course is his trade.
And flavor.
He's a good guy. Someone asked him once, "Where do you get your shoes?" And he just said, "Paris." What a brilliant answer that was. I think it's important.
Sundays?
Sundays. Villa Stefano.
Yeah, that was my favorite.
Oh, didn't we just love the ceramic floor? I bet you
didn't.
I bet you got the posh bit and the wooden floor.
No, I wasn't actually. No, I wasn't.
No.
I was scared of that part actually. So
I had a near-death, not a near-death experience. It was a near-death experience at Villa Stefano. Ceramic floor, and I was dancing with a lady who was taller than me, and I did a kind of like double spin, and she anticipated a dip. She threw herself horizontally down towards the ceramic floor, and I just had to catch her up and grab her.
Oh my goodness.
I think I put my back out, and I remember her hair was long enough to be all over the floor, but her head didn't hit.
Oh goodness.
And terrified me, absolutely terrified me.
Wow. Sorry, and you were going to say it was important you wanted to mention something. Sorry about that.
The style at the time. In 1996, I built my first website, and I, what's the word, with all humility, suggested that was the first use of the term London style. And this was several years before Leon Rose also coined or recoined the term London style. And I think it's his, if you like, linear version of it that has persisted.
Yeah.
And all credit to him for that. But my concept of London style was different. The main influences on the salsa in London was the Colombian community and the Afro-Caribbean community. And as I mentioned before, all the main dancers were either, you know, Afro-Caribbean or Latino, and they both brought something different that you didn't see from the European dancers. It was different from Europe. I had no concept. I hadn't seen anyone dance from the States or Cuba by then, apart from Alvaro. And what it had a sort of fluidity of movement that I attribute to the Afro-Caribbean community. And it flowed one move into the next. You couldn't tell when it started or when it stopped. It was like watching a lava lamp. It doesn't have a stop moment. And at the same time, you had this compact precision of the Colombian style coming out of that Pachanga Boogaloo scene from Cali and there. And you fused the two together and you had something unique. I have to say there's a third influence as well, the modern jive scene. And there was a fair bit of crossover, particularly teachers like Roger Chin, who was absolutely core to the modern jive scene, but also, you know, very well respected within the salsa scene. And what that brought was a unique teaching format, I suppose. Unlike the American studio system, where they have fixed length courses, which was also replicated in Germany. You know, you do 6 layers of 10 weeks and you work your way through the system. London was based on, you turn up, you do a class, if you like it, you might come back the next week. And if you don't, you go somewhere else or you get out of salsa. And I think that gave us a massive advantage. The salsa teachers in London had to learn how to hold the group. We had to deliver. We had to be not just educational, but we had to be entertaining. And it worked. It worked. I think, you know, I'm not sure history has given the London scene of that time the credit that it's due. But when you look at how many of the London teachers from that time, Susanna, Mario, Robert Charlemagne, you know, they're all still there. They're all still there. And that shows how, in my mind, I think the night that sums it up better than anything was probably about 1994, and it was at Bar Salsa, and there was a competition. And it was Susanna and Chandy dancing, and it was Robert Charlemagne, and to my shame, I don't know the name of his partner. And it was like watching worlds collide. It was amazing. Wow. Robert was just the epitome of that fluidity. And, you know, Susanna and Chandy had that, you know, crispness and that. And the room was polarized. And the atmosphere was electric, and it was the nearest I've seen to it since is some of the films about hip hop battles.
I get you.
Yeah. And I'll never remember. You know, I'll never forget that night.
And that was 19. What year was that?
I'm pretty sure it was 1994. Pretty sure.
Okay.
The year before we started teaching. So yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay. So something that I wanted to know is, so when you talked about Homero, was Homero the first Cuban teacher that you saw?
No, Nelson Batista was.
Apart from Nelson, sorry, of course, I've interviewed Nelson. Apart from Nelson, was Homero the next one?
Yes, definitely. definitely. Yeah.
Mm.
I can't think of any others.
Okay, so let me ask you, this is something, when I interviewed Elder, Xiomara, and Ramiro, I asked them all the same question. And I think, because I'm not from London, I came to London in 1999 or 1998, but I remember the transition. I used to come from Birmingham every now and again to have a night out, and absolutely amazing. But the question that really, again, that intrigues me is, obviously, they were the first generation. And I did say to them, to be quite frank, especially the men, because they were Latinos, they kind of, you know, dark, mysterious Latin lovers. They kind of had this film star kind of stardom, you know, they had the pick of the ladies and all of this. But I think at the same time, I want to know if you think this attributed to it is they really got into partying and they weren't looking after their business. What's your thoughts on this? Because, you know, because I said it's really, as I said, it fascinates me that they were doing really, really well. Obviously, the next people to come in, I think most of the people were not Latinos, as you said, either Afro-Caribbean or English, but they had more business sense and they set up outside of London and even in London. Tell me, if you can be honest, what's your views of that time and what you saw and what made you decide to teach? I'll probably ask that in whole.
Again, I think it's an excellent question, and so relevant post Me Too movements and things like that. So I think the first thing to say is it was a different world. The values were different. So what I'd like to say within the context that I feel no blame and offer no shame to anyone for what they did or what they didn't do. But you're right. These were. Let's talk about the men. Let's talk about the men. Let's
talk about the men.
Yeah, let's talk about the men. I'm a dance teacher. We can have that conversation. See, that's the stereotype. So the cliche was you had this strong male figure who was the numero uno. His ex-girlfriend, once removed, would teach the next level down. If he did advanced, she did intermediate. His her replacement, who was less experienced, taught the next layer down. And again, without any blame or shame, there was a battle going on for who would be the next girl to teach the beginners. There was an article that came out in Time Out where a journalist had been round half a dozen Salsa teachers, mine included, and she rated them all. And the teacher that came out on top, perfectly justifiably, they were a good, well-established setup, no question of that. But he'd also slept with a journalist. And yeah, I remember thinking about this with the whole Martin Bashir story recently, and I'm thinking, yeah, okay, it's different. The Latin, the stereotypical Latin value, the macho. Interestingly, the macho comes from the same origin as the larger of the two conga drums that was also called the macho. Is part of it. It's part of the DNA of it. And now the world has had this COVID break. We have to decide as to whether we want it to remain part of it. Because along with it has gone, lots of people who have had their back in the day moments, but other people have been destroyed. I don't think that's too strong a word. Sexual violence. Am I allowed to offer one or two swear words? Not too bad, but
I've had many people swear, don't worry. It's not a problem.
So I was starting a night in sound in the 5th floor of Leicester Square, and on the first night a little guy was going around the room, going up to every lady saying, "I want to fuck you." Ooh. And yeah, and then he would get brushed off, so he'd go to the next, "I want to fuck you." He'd go to the next lady, "I want to fuck you."
Wow.
And a friend of mine who'd been teaching with me for a long time, she came up to me and said, and it always struck me as odd, "I don't know if I should mention this to you." And she told me what he'd been doing. I then showed him the window or the lift shaft and gave him a choice as to which one he was going to go out of. Sadly, he waited for the lift to arrive before he chose that one. I was offended by his behavior, but he might have some mental health issue, who knows. But I was also really, I think the word is saddened, that a teaching colleague of mine, a lady, did not feel it was a red flag. "I'm not sure if I should mention this to you." Hell yeah. And I came across this recently with the Ask Angela campaign.
Yeah,
I'm familiar with that. This named after a lady who was killed, I believe, in Scotland on a date. And so
wow.
Angela,
I didn't know where it originated from, actually. So thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that.
I think so. I think so. It's a couple of years back now, but the code word is used, and everyone's, you put posters up in the toilet, "Ask Angela." So if someone goes to the bar and says, "Can I speak to Angela?" you know they're in problem. It doesn't matter if they go to a dance teacher or a DJ or a security guy or a bar staff. Everyone's on the same page. This person needs help. And we don't have that, as far as I know, at any Latin venue prior to COVID. I did suggest it at a venue, and in fairness, it was a fairly light-hearted conversation. So again, no blame, no shame. But the junior manager turned around and said, "Well, it wouldn't work here because we've got a member of staff called Angela." And he just go, "Oh God, come on." So I think the politics of the day back in the 90s are different from those now. And I think my views have definitely changed and evolved as I've matured. And I understand and have a little sympathy for younger men today for two main reasons. One is they've grown up as a generation of porn junkies, and I think that desensitizes them to many aspects of the world. And they are also in a post pickup artist world. Remember, there was a big thing about the pickup artistry. The film I think it was called The Game.
Yeah.
And
I've actually seen that in effect. Actually, I've been out a few times where I've seen that in play. Absolutely, yeah.
I've seen it as well. I'm training to be a talking therapist, a psychotherapist, and I was, at the time of the whole Me Too thing, I thought, and I read the book, and I understand some of the psychology behind it and where it comes from, and it seems horrendous. I had a student, salsa student, who was a older man, say early 40s, very successful accountant by all by his account, and he called me after he'd done a couple of workshops with me and said, "I'm thinking of spending £5,000 on this pickup artistry course. Do you think I should do it?" And my heart went out to him. This man was so sad, lonely, and felt so broken that he couldn't make a relationship, initiate and maintain a relationship.